And then Lynn has a prelude for us. Thank you, Lynn. By way of announcements, we have a monthly meeting for worship with attention to business at 10:35. So hope everybody can be here for that. I'm not aware of any other announcements. Anybody else? Joys or concerns to share this morning?
I have a big joy. Yesterday, we had a family reunion on my mother's family. My uncle, who was 101 in August, was the host. And there were 70 people that came from various places in the United States. I had a cousin who is a day older than I am, who flew in from Minneapolis. Had another cousin who came from Utah. Cousins who drove in from Tennessee, and lots from Indiana and Kentucky. And I guess I was fortunate because it was at the Methodist Church in Mooresville, and that's 5 minutes from my house, so I didn't have very far to go. But it was wonderful. He is in good health. He stood without a podium and held a microphone and spoke to us for about 20 minutes about the importance of family history and heritage. He told stories in the past. He told jokes, so it was humorous, it was serious, and we just had a wonderful time yesterday.
Wow.
And lots of good food too. It was a pitch-in.
Well, marching band season is over. I spent all day Friday at Lucas Oil watching bands and didn't get home until like 9 o'clock. And then yesterday we went to Ben Davis to watch more bands. And Decatur didn't make the final cut, so I can now go out and get a haircut this week.
Your lucky haircut. Well, we had really successful Wilmington College board meetings. It's just amazing what the change of presidents has done to have somebody really competent in, and the spirit on campus is really good. And we've had like 4 $1 million gifts come in the last 3 months. So people are starting to give again, and the advancement department, which I'm the chair for the board, they put up a slideshow of things that were being done, and the last one was a bunch of Hereford cows coming towards us, and it says, and we're getting more cows, because the educational farm there, they were short cows for the number of students that are enrolled. The ag department's our biggest department, followed by business school. So we have a whole, I think they got 20 more cows. So they were all thrilled. I was like, that's nice. So I think, of course, the Mid-East is certainly weighing on all of us. It's one hardly knows what to say in some ways with friends on both sides. I know I've been getting lots of emails from my Jewish friends that they want peace, but they're also very concerned, and they are not happy with the moral equivalent that's being drawn between Hamas's slaughter of people at the music festival and on the kibbutz, and taking hostages with their bombing. And of course, the Palestinian friends are like, but the bombing's so indiscriminate. Last night, they showed on the news this morning that there was a prayer gathering at the Islamic Center of North America, not praying for one side or another, but just praying for peace. And I think that's about all we can do, because even here in the U.S., both sides are so polarized. To know what to say is just almost impossible, because both sides have their share of blame, for sure, in my opinion. So let's hold those folks in God's light and love, and pray that their leaders will respond to that which is eternal instead of their own selfish wills. Of course, I have to pray that for myself too. Well, Jonathan's going to be our worship leader this morning, so I invite you to center down, hold these things that we've talked about, both joys and concerns, and God's light and love. And Jonathan will lead out of the silence as he feels led.
So my message this morning is the result of kind of the coalescing of my thoughts after recently listening to an audiobook. It was the starting point of a line of thinking that led me to relate its message to Quaker spiritual practice. So hopefully what I'll say isn't too meandering, since it's the product of my own kind of sewing up of my own thoughts based on kind of an initial inspiration from the book. The subject of the book is sacred rest. I think that it would be fair to say that life in 2023 is, for most Americans, impacted by experiences of stress, fatigue, and overwhelm resulting from our overbusy lifestyles. There's seemingly too few hours available in the day for accomplishing the various tasks and chores for which we are responsible. At least 40 hours, if not more, are taken up each week with work for most people. There are family obligations, grocery shopping, errand running. The list can seem endless. Most of us also dedicate plenty of hours to the true god of our idolatry, the cell phone. As a result, we feel stressed, exhausted, and spread thin. We may even experience a sense of guilt due to our inability to complete all of the items on what can seem like a perpetual to-do list. As a licensed clinical social worker, I can attest to an increasing number of studies, articles, and books being published to address what some have called the pandemic within the pandemic, that of stress, overwhelm, exhaustion, and in many cases, resulting depression. One such book is entitled Sacred Rest: Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity by Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, MD. I learned of this book while listening to one or the other podcasts that keep me company during work-related drives. In the book, Dr. Dalton Smith addresses our need for true rest, which she notes is not the same thing as sleep. Instead, she identifies 7 types of rest that are essential for our health, happiness, and relationships. These 7 types of rest are physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, sensory, social, and creative. Dr. Dalton Smith outlines principles that we can use to recover our energy through a better understanding of the types of rest, and by engaging in the self-care necessary to give our minds, bodies, and spirits the rest they need. In the book, she uses spiritual principles to guide this process. My encounter with Dr. Dalton Smith's book led me to consider the intersection of spirituality and rest, of rest as a sacred and important component of life. This immediately brought to mind the Jewish concept of the Sabbath, or Shabbat, which lasts from sundown on Friday through sundown on Saturday. The Jewish concept of Shabbat is rooted in the Hebrew verb meaning cease or to rest. Among other concepts from the Hebrew Bible, Shabbat is rooted in the idea that God created for 6 days and rested on the 7th. As such, Shabbat was set aside as a day to be free from the concerns of the other days of the week. In ancient times, this even applied to slaves and draft animals within Hebrew society. Work such as sowing, plowing, reaping, baking, and building or extinguishing a fire are forbidden on Shabbat for observant Jews. These types of work are creative in nature and related to exercising some degree of control over one's environment. Shabbat is a time for rest, prayer, and study. The Jewish practice of Shabbat observance was the basis for what became the Christian understanding of the Sabbath. Observed on the first day of the week by most denominations of Christianity, the Sabbath is also typically seen as a day dedicated to worship and rest. While Quakers have traditionally rejected the keeping of specific holy days, the first day of the week has been retained as the primary day for meeting for worship. Seeing all of life as sacramental and all times as presenting the possibility for the experience of and worship of God, Quakers do not have a history of Sabbath observance really rooted in a sense of law keeping in the same way that Jews and even many Christians do. However, there is a practice among Friends which is analogous to some aspects of Shabbat and traditional ideas of the Sabbath, and that is this spiritual discipline of retirement. Sadly, I was to learn this does not involve the Religious Society of Friends making a matching contribution to my 401k. The practice does, however, present Friends with an opportunity to engage in a unique form of contemplation, which offers a prescription for our harried lives, not dissimilar to some of what Dr. Dalton Smith addresses in her book. As I will describe, the Quaker practice of retirement enables the individual to find rest for the various dimensions of the self while also engaging in self-examination and communion with God. In her book, To Be Broken and Tender, Quaker author Marjorie Post Abbott addresses retirement as a conscious stepping away from doing in order to spend time in communion with God. She notes that historical friends such as William Penn and George Fox promoted the practice, advocating that members of the society spend time in solitude and silence in order to attune more fully to the inward guide. Retirement is not meditation in the sense that it is understood by various Eastern traditions, not an emptying of the self, but rather a turning deeply inward for the purpose of encountering the inward seat of the Christ Spirit. This is a stilling of the body and mind, a form of rest for the body, mind, and spirit. Quoting George Fox, "Stand still in that which is pure, after you see yourselves, and then mercy comes in. After you see your thoughts and the temptations, do not think, but submit. Then the power comes. Stand still in the light and submit to it, and the other will be hushed and gone. Then contentment comes. When temptations and troubles appear, sink down in that which is pure, and all will be hushed and fly away. Your strength is to stand still." Post Abbott notes that this is a process which involves becoming humble and vulnerable for the purpose of being restored. The discipline of retirement is also a time to allow the light to reveal to us our difficulties, flaws, and failures. As such, it's also likely that the practice will bring to the surface challenging material. This may relate to our own behavior, events from our past, or disturbing world events. Similar to what we are told of Jesus going into the wilderness to pray or to the Garden of Gethsemane prior to his crucifixion, we may also face our own dark nights of the soul as a result of the searching of our spirits by the inward light. Post Abbott quotes Margaret Fell on this subject. "Now, friends, deal plainly with yourselves, and let the eternal light search you, for this will deal plainly with you. It will rip you up and lay you open, naked and bare, before the Lord God, from whom you cannot hide yourselves. Therefore, give over the deceiving of your souls." Not exactly restful, at least not in the short term, perhaps. But the long-term spiritual benefit of the practice of retirement is to allow the light to shine on that which is most difficult and undesirable within ourselves, with a view toward our healing and redemption. In this lies the ability to move forward, free of guilt, more practiced in the life of the Spirit. The self-examined life can then become one led by the promptings of the inward light and less rooted in our own egos and self-destructive behaviors. Such a spirit-led life is not promised to us as an easy life. However, in its practice, friends may find that regular retirement affords opportunity to experience a truly deep rest that is rooted in relationship with our divine source. And from that, I drew a couple of queries. Do you regularly make time for periods of retirement? And how might you draw on examples from previous generations of friends to do so.
I don't know how many friends here have had the good fortune to meet Marjorie Post Abbott, but she's certainly a writer who lives what she writes. She's a very busy person, serves on lots of Quaker organizations and so forth, but there's an unhurriedness about her presence. If you're with her, that you can just feel calm. She practices inner retirement in the midst of her daily life, and I have long admired her for that because I just tend to get frenetic. But she talks, she lives the retirement. And that is one of the Quaker principles that I think we've lost, is even talking about it that way. So I appreciate your message, Jonathan, reminding us of that important Quaker concept of not just resting and sleeping, but the idea of retirement, getting away from and centering and allowing God to speak to us, not just during meeting for worship, but during our busy days. Now continue with unprogrammed worship and say goodbye to our friends who need to leave. So we hope to see you next week and or back again at 10:35 for meeting for business. I know one shouldn't speak twice out of the silence, but when Lynn played the closing hymn, it's one that has always tendered my heart. It has since I was a freshman in college and at Malone College. And 4 friends of mine and I formed a little musical group, and we used to tour around eastern Ohio and central Ohio to church festivals and various dinners and singing. We were the entertainment. We were cheap. And that was always our closing number, was Search Me, O God, and Know My Heart Today. As I got older, though, I'm often reminded of the words of the author of Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, who says, if we really realized the power that some of our prayers and hymns invoke from God, when we come to church, we'd be issuing crash helmets and seatbelts. And that's one of those songs that reminds me of that quote. It's like inviting the God of the universe to search me and know me. I don't know why I'm trying to put words to that which is, I think, ineffable and unexpressible, the power behind that. And as I said, that song tenders my heart.
When Jonathan said he was going to speak about rest, I started looking in the hymn book for hymns that talked about rest. Really couldn't find anything. So I decided to play 2 of my favorite prayer hymns. The first one, the words are, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord." And then the second one is what Brent just said. And I can't think of anything much more powerful than those 2 bits of scripture spoken as prayer.
Well, if all hearts are clear, we'll close meeting for worship and reconvene for meeting for worship with attention to business in about 15 minutes. Thank you, Jonathan, for
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was a great message, and now I have to follow you next Sunday.
It
It was really great, Jonathan.
Monty Python says, and now for something completely different. So,
One of the things I really appreciate about this group, though, is that the messages that are given are in tune with the personalities of the people giving them, and yet there is something in each one for all of us to take away.
okay, hope to see you soon.
Definitely.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.